Historical significance. For this homework assignment, I chose a scientific development and a technological development. There have been several scientific developments over the course of history, and I chose to discuss penicillin. Penicillin was discovered in 1928 by accident. Alexander Fleming, while working on finding a cure for influenza, left out a culture. Days later, he came back to that culture and found mold growing inside. He noticed that the mold, which is now called penicillin, killed the bacteria. When Alexander Fleming first published his findings, no one listened because he wasn't a trained chemist. The research got set aside for roughly 10 years. Research was then picked back up around 1940, as stated by Sarah Ann McGill. In the 1940s, two scientists from Oxford, England, named Howard Florey and Ernest Boris Chain, became interested in penicillin. Using what Fleming had already discovered, they developed penicillin into a life-saving drug. Once they figured out that penicillin was going to help numerous infections and cuts and be able to help people, they then started to put it into action more. So during World War II, penicillin was helped to cure or treat the wounded victims. To military surgeons, the arrival of penicillin was indeed a miracle. In the early years of war, when a medical convoy came in, surgeons working at field hospitals commonly rushed down to the line of injured soldiers, tearing off dressings in search of clean wounds. While doing my research on penicillin, I realized that once they realized that it was going to help people, they just started to make it in these huge mass productions, and I found a video that I'd like to share with you guys.
Through mass production methods, America is continually increasing its output of penicillin, the new drug that effects almost miraculous cures. The liquid medium in these bottles will grow the mold that forms penicillin. First, however, the liquid is purified by sterilization in great ovens. After sterilization, the medium is carefully inoculated with the seeds of the penicillin mold. The next step is incubation. Slowly, the mold that contains the precious drug forms in the bottles. All penicillin produced is used by the Allied fighting forces. The liquid now charged with penicillin is poured from the bottles. Turned into a powder, it is ready for use.
Comparatively speaking, the quality of penicillin is way better today than it was when it was first discovered. Obviously, you know, we have a lot of technology now that they didn't have back then. When it was first discovered, they were a little bit cautionary about it, but now it seems like you go into a hospital and you have a cut or you have an ear infection, and they're automatically going to prescribe you penicillin or some other type of antibiotic, but mostly common is penicillin. So, yay science. Apart from being scientifically ahead of others, America is also so technologically advanced. So for my second topic, I chose to discuss the telephone and how it was created and how we use it today. Obviously, you know, we can't go anywhere without our telephones. It's a huge part of my daily life, and I'm sure it's a huge part of your daily life, so that's kind of why I chose to talk about the telephone. In 1874, Alexander Graham Bell figured out how to build this machine. He called his machine the electric speed machine. So then it took a couple of years for him to really dig into that research, and it wasn't until March 12th, 1876 that Bell himself made his first phone call, or the first phone call. Bell himself made the first long-distance phone call as well from New York to Chicago in 1892. This was followed by the first coast-to-coast call in 1915, and in 1923, the first overseas call was made between New York and England. So let's talk about appearance of telephones. Think about how far we've come since the first telephone. The first telephone probably hung up on a wall, had a rotary dial, you know, then it transitioned to those phones with long cables that, you know, you all loved to stretch from the kitchen all the way to your bedroom just for a little bit of privacy. And now look, we have these cordless phones that even have the internet. A little fun fact, the internet was made available on a telephone in 1996. So just, what is that? 20 years ago, we just had internet. So think about where we're going to be in 20 years from now. Today we cannot live without our phones. At least I know I can't live without my phone. It's a disgusting habit, but we need it. You know, we want to check the weather and we grab our phones. We want to find out where someone's house is and we grab our phone. We want to know, what's 30 divided by 5 and we grab a calculator. It's always all on our phone and we depend on them so much. Whereas back in the old days, or when phones were first discovered, they were still writing letters and they were constantly writing letters. And I'm sure it took a lot of adjustment on everyday citizens to, instead of writing a letter, pick up the phone and call somebody and ask them a question. But now it's such a second nature for us to grab the phone and ask them, or shoot even a text, which they probably didn't even think about doing back then. So I definitely would say that our phones are very, very vital to us. When it comes down to what's more influential to our culture, I think that's really hearsay. We take penicillin, and penicillin can save lives. It can stop something so small like an ear infection or a minor cut, and it can cure the infection and they won't lose a limb or their hearing, so it saves a life. We take the phone and, say someone's being robbed and a neighbor sees and they call and the police get there before something happens to the resident by the person that broke in, that saved a life, all because we had the technology to make that call. So it's really neither here nor there which one's more influential. Both have helped us and will continue to help us throughout history.